Have you ever walked away from an interaction thinking, why do I feel so drained? Why did that person talk down to me when all I did was try to help? You've probably been told your whole life that kindness is a virtue, that helping others is the mark of a good person. And that's true, at least in theory. But in practice, that same kindness, when not consciously directed and healthily bounded, can become a magnet for manipulation, disrespect, and even contempt. If that feels painfully familiar, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not wrong. This video is for you. By the end of this two-part series, you'll understand why your kindness has sometimes backfired and how to protect your generous spirit without ever compromising your integrity. Together, we'll explore this through the lens of Carl Jung's profound teachings on the shadow, the hidden dimension of the human psyche, and how it reveals the unseen dynamics playing out in your relationships. Let's begin. The paradox of kindness. Why goodness isn't always met with gratitude. We grow up believing that kindness is reciprocal, that if we treat others well, they will return the favor. And yet, reality often paints a different picture. Have you ever gone out of your way for someone only to be ignored, dismissed, or even taken advantage of? That emotional sting is all too common. And it's not because people are inherently cruel or broken. It's because kindness, when not balanced with self-awareness and boundaries, triggers a series of psychological responses both in us and in those around us that we're rarely taught to recognize or manage. This is where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow comes in. Jung taught us that we all have hidden parts of our psyche, unacknowledged drives, unmet needs, unexpressed anger, and repressed potential. And when we don't integrate these parts, they begin to show up in unintended, sometimes destructive ways. One of those ways? The tendency to see kind people not as strong but as weak, as easy to manipulate, as unworthy of respect. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To truly reclaim the dignity of your kindness, we need to unpack 5 core reasons why your goodness might have been met with disregard and what you can do about it. Reason 1. Boundless kindness is mistaken for weakness. Let's start with the most common misunderstanding. The belief that if you're kind, you must also be soft, passive, naive. This isn't a conscious belief most people walk around with, but it's deeply ingrained in our social wiring. Human beings test limits. It's in our nature. And when someone consistently puts others first, never says no, and is always available, they often trigger an unconscious response. This person can be taken for granted. They won't push back. They don't need much. Psychologists refer to this as the benevolence exploitation effect, a tendency to take advantage of those who are reliably generous. You see, in the absence of clear boundaries, people assume you have none, and the more you give without expectation, the less they see the value in your giving. Not because you're not valuable, but because they've stopped needing to think about your value. Personal reflection. I used to believe that if I gave enough, people would naturally respect me. But what I learned often the hard way is that generosity without self-definition doesn't inspire admiration. It invites entitlement. Carl Jung once said, "No one can have a clear conscience without knowing their shadow." The truth is, when we don't acknowledge our own assertiveness, our inner no, our right to space and rest, we give others a blank check to cross emotional boundaries we haven't defined. Reason 2, kindness reflects others' insecurities. Here's something you may not have expected. Sometimes, your kindness unsettles people not because they see you as weak, but because your authenticity highlights what they've buried within themselves. There are people who cannot trust freely, people who see every act of goodwill through a lens of suspicion. What's the catch? What do they really want? For them, your pure intentions disrupt the mental narrative they constructed to survive a world where everyone is out for themselves. Your altruism becomes a mirror, one they may not want to look into. This is projection at work, another of Jung's great contributions to psychology. People project what they cannot accept in themselves onto others. If someone distrusts your kindness, it may not be about you at all. It's about their shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to confront. Insight. When someone treats your kindness with contempt, ask, what are they protecting themselves from? Often, it's their own buried pain or fear. And while it's not your job to heal that pain, understanding its presence allows you to detach. You stop taking their rejection personally. Instead, you start seeing it for what it is, a defense mechanism, a cry for protection in the language of rejection. Reason 3, you disrupt the social status quo. Let's talk about society. We live in a culture that often rewards ambition, competitiveness, and self-promotion. Whether it's in the workplace, friendships, or even family dynamics, power and ego tend to dominate the landscape. In this world, genuine kindness can be jarring. It doesn't play the game. And because it doesn't conform, it creates friction. When you act from a place of compassion and expect nothing in return, you challenge unspoken rules. Rules like never give without getting, or don't show too much vulnerability, it'll be used against you. Your presence becomes a quiet rebellion against transactional living. And not everyone will celebrate that. Some may label you as too sensitive, naive, or unrealistic. Others may distance themselves not because of something you've done wrong, but because your authenticity makes them question the way they've always operated. Lesson: when your kindness is met with discomfort, it may mean you're doing something right. It may mean you are, consciously or not, inviting others into a deeper, more conscious way of being. Jung famously said, "What you resist persists," and that includes emotional patterns. The more people resist authenticity, the more deeply they are bound by the emotional armor they wear. Your presence threatens the illusion they live in, and so they push back. But that resistance, it's not a reason to stop being kind. It's a reason to become even more discerning about how, when, and to whom you offer your goodness. Reason 4, people equate generosity with emotional servitude. One of the most damaging misconceptions about kindness is that it's synonymous with availability. When you're always saying yes, always listening, always helping, you unintentionally step into a role you may have never consciously agreed to. The emotional caretaker, the fixer, the one who never needs anything. Over time, this creates a dynamic where your needs vanish, not because you don't have them, but because no one thinks to ask. You've trained the people around you to believe that you don't require support, that you're endlessly resourced, endlessly patient, endlessly giving. And that's not sustainable. Personal note, I've lived this. I've been the strong one, the good listener, the go-to helper. But it came at a cost: burnout, resentment, and a slow erosion of my own voice. True kindness doesn't mean disappearing. It doesn't mean tolerating emotional imbalances. It means recognizing your worth and honoring your own humanity. You are not a bottomless well. You have limits. And those limits are sacred. The moment you begin to voice them, to say, "I can't this time," or "I need rest," you reintroduce balance. You remind others that kindness is not a one-way street. And in doing so, you begin to re-educate those around you on what respect really looks like. Reason 5, unconditional availability devalues your presence. There's a powerful truth in economics that applies equally to human relationships. What is too easily available is often taken for granted. If you're always ready to help, always picking up the phone, always the first to show up, people will begin to treat your support as expected, not appreciated. It's not that they're cruel, it's just how the human brain works. Familiarity breeds complacency, and over time, this can lead to deep emotional fatigue. You begin to feel invisible. You start to question your worth. You wonder if anyone truly sees the effort behind your kindness, or if it's all just being absorbed into the background noise of people's expectations. Reflection. The most painful part of this dynamic is not being unappreciated. It's realizing you've helped create conditions for that to happen. But here's the good news. It's never too late to reclaim your energy, your voice, and your boundaries. When you begin to give consciously choosing who, when, and how you restore the sacred value of your kindness. Carl Jung taught that the balance between light and shadow is essential for wholeness. When we give without discernment, our light casts a shadow. That shadow looks like exhaustion, resentment, and invisibility. But when we give with awareness, when we integrate the shadow and bring boundaries into our kindness, we become whole. Awakening the conscious giver, from martyrdom to empowered kindness. We explored 5 key reasons your kindness may be misinterpreted or even disrespected. Now, it's time to go deeper and, more importantly, forward. You see, the problem has never been your kindness. The world needs more of it. The issue lies in how we've been conditioned to express kindness through overextension, self-abandonment, and silent suffering. But what if you could give from a place of clarity, of sovereignty? What if your compassion could inspire not dependence, but mutual respect? This next section is about reclaiming your power as a conscious giver. It's about bringing your light and your shadow into alignment so you no longer shrink to be good, but expand to be whole. Let's explore how. The inner shift, integrating your shadow to reclaim your authority. Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is the key to transforming how others respond to your kindness. Because the root of the issue isn't them, it's your unconscious patterns. Let's look at a few common ones. The helper complex, where your worth is tied to how much you do for others. The savior archetype, where you believe it's your responsibility to rescue or fix people. The peacekeeper persona, where you avoid conflict by always being agreeable. These are not flaws. They are survival strategies, coping mechanisms built from early experiences where love may have felt conditional or where your needs were dismissed. But the moment you bring these patterns into conscious awareness, you reclaim choice. Reflection exercise. Ask yourself, what part of me believes that I must be kind to be loved? Who taught me that saying no means I'll be rejected? These questions don't just bring insight, they bring freedom. Once you begin to see the unconscious contracts you've been living by, you can start rewriting them. This is shadow integration in action. And from here, you step into a new relationship with kindness, one rooted in self-respect, not self-sacrifice. Setting energetic boundaries. The art of saying no without guilt. Let's talk boundaries. Not the rigid kind that shuts people out, but the energetic kind that defines the space where your yes has meaning. Boundaries are not walls. They are clarity. They tell the world, this is where I end and you begin. The most beautiful, kindest people I know are also the clearest with their limits. Why? Because they understand this truth. You cannot give what you don't own, and you cannot own what you don't protect. Here's a framework I call the compassionate boundary model built on 4 principles. Clarity. Be honest about what you can and cannot give. Neutrality. Set the boundary without emotional charge, no need to over-explain or apologize. Consistency. Reinforce the boundary gently but firmly when it's tested. Recovery. When you overextend, it happens. Forgive yourself and realign. Let's make it practical. I care about you, but I'm not in a space to support you fully right now. I hear that this is urgent for you, but I need to prioritize my rest tonight. These are not selfish statements. They are declarations of self-trust. They protect your ability to show up fully when it does feel right to give. And here's the paradox. When people know where you stand, they actually trust you more, not less. Teaching people how to treat you through emotional reparenting. Now, this one's deep. If you consistently find yourself in relationships where your kindness is exploited, you may be replaying an emotional script written in childhood. One where love was earned through effort, one where silence kept the peace. This is where emotional reparenting comes in a process of giving yourself the love, protection, and validation you may never have received consistently as a child. Ask yourself, what did I need to hear that I never heard? Then say it to yourself over and over. My needs matter. I'm allowed to disappoint people and still be lovable. I don't need to be perfect to be safe. You are not being dramatic. You are healing. And as you heal, something magical happens. Your relationships start to shift, not because other people have changed, but because you have. You stop attracting dynamics that mirror your old wounds. You stop allowing behavior that dishonors your worth. You become a living example of this truth. Kindness is not about diminishing yourself. It's about being so rooted in your own value that you no longer need others to validate it. The power of selective generosity. Why does someone elevate your kindness? One of the most transformative lessons I've learned is this. You don't owe everyone access to your kindness. Let that sink in. You are allowed to be generous strategically, to give from overflow, not obligation, to invest in people who are emotionally reciprocal, not just emotionally needy. This is not being closed off. This is being wise. Think of your kindness as a precious resource. Would you pour gold into a broken vessel? No, not because the vessel is unworthy, but because it cannot hold what you offer. Some people are not ready to receive you with the respect you deserve, and your job is not to convince them otherwise. Your job is to choose who gets the privilege of your energy. This is the sacred art of discernment, and when practiced well, it turns your kindness into a force that uplifts rather than depletes. From people pleaser to peace bringer, a new kindness archetype, there's a major shift happening globally. Empaths, sensitives, and natural givers are waking up to their power not to become colder, but to become clearer. We are moving from the archetype of the people pleaser who says yes to avoid guilt to the peace bringer who says yes and no with equal love. The peace bringer understands that true kindness includes truth. That love sometimes means distance. That helping someone doesn't always mean saving them. And the peace bringer doesn't fear being misunderstood because they know their intentions are rooted in integrity. You don't need to be less kind. You need to be more whole. That is the work. That is the invitation. And when you walk this path, you begin to attract others who live the same way: authentic, awake, reciprocal. You're no longer alone. Claim your boundaried kindness. Today, if you've made it this far, you're already doing the work. You're already questioning old stories and stepping into a more empowered self. So here's your challenge and your invitation. Audit your kindness. Where is it flowing freely? Where is it being drained? Set one loving boundary this week. Just one. Practice saying no without guilt. Speak one truth you've been avoiding. Kindness without honesty is not kindness, it's performance. And most importantly, write a new definition of kindness for yourself. Make it fierce. Make it wise. Make it yours. Because the world doesn't need more exhausted people pleasers. It needs more conscious hearts, people who give generously, live truthfully, and honor their full selves in the process. That's what you're becoming. So don't dim your light to make others comfortable. Don't shrink your soul to keep the peace. And don't stop being kind. Just start being kind to yourself, too. If this video resonated with you, share it with someone else who gives too much. They may need to hear this more than you know. And if you like more content like this on emotional mastery, shadow work, and living with soul, make sure to subscribe. Turn on notifications, and let's walk this journey together. See you in the next one.